Welcome back. Latin America, like Europe and the U.S., is a continent comprised of people from a wide variety of ethnic and racial backgrounds. However, incidents of racism are more common than you think. Even a country like Brazil, which is one of the most integrated nations, experiences a high degree of prejudice and discrimination. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Guillermo Ponce. He is head of an organization called Afrohispanos. It seeks to promote racial tolerance and equality in both Latin America and Europe. Guillermo, welcome to our studio.
Buenos días. Thank you.
You are originally from Cuba, but now you live in Spain. Have you personally been discriminated against?
Bueno, vivimos en el mundo. Existe la discriminación.
The truth is that we live in a world of discrimination. It's a scourge left over after hundreds of years of slavery. Spain is no exception. I've been the victim of discrimination. I've been called bad names because of the color of my skin, black, in a derogatory manner. I've had to go through the court system and have won in court against a discriminator. You can't hide anything from judges. Thankfully, there's a justice system that can put bad, inappropriate behavior in its place, and we can fight against racial discrimination.
Luchar para erradicar esa lacra que es la discriminación racial.
Tell us about the racial divide that is seen in Cuba and other Latin American countries. What kind of discrimination are we seeing there?
En Cuba, en América Latina, en Europa, en Estados Unidos.
In Cuba, Latin America, Europe, and the United States, racism comes from history, from the relationship established between the white people, Europeans who dominated America and other countries around the world, and rather than cheap labor, they used slaves. First was the indigenous peoples, and afterward the blacks. Because of that today, there's a great structural racial divide that leads black people to be underrepresented in power structures. We don't have equality. It's true that many countries have advanced the fight against structural inequality. Cuba and other countries in Latin America, like Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela, are working to eradicate this structural weakness and end the equality that favored white European origins communities. We can say that our societies are changing, but there's still so much to be done.
Pero falta mucho por hacer.
As we mentioned, you live in Spain, and there is a huge Afro-migrant population there. What sort of issues are they facing?
El tema más grave para los inmigrantes de origen africano.
It is worse for the immigrants of African descent than any other immigrants. For the blacks, it's the question of integration, insertion into society. In order to gain Spanish citizenship, those of African descent have to be in Spain for 10 years as a legal resident with a job. Immigrants from the Americas only have to be there for a year and a half, 2 years under the law. For a black immigrant that came to Spain and Europe, the most important thing is to overcome the barrier of legality that permits them to be a legal resident. The European states in the middle of the economic crisis started avoiding immigrants. Despite hearing of the wars in Africa, of the hunger, of the misery, they rejected them. What they did is put barriers to avoid them coming in, although these immigrants, according to the United Nations, have rights. They have to be taken in because they have come from war-torn countries as refugees. Thus, the challenge to change this reality is huge.
Por tanto, el reto para cambiar esa realidad es muy grande.
President Dilma Rousseff barely won re-election. Do you think black voters had any influence on the outcome?
Brasil tiene una población que supera el 62,7%.
In the 2010 census, 62% of Brazilians identify themselves as black of African descent. As it turns out, they are the majority of the population. They influenced, inevitably, the results of the last election. The legacy of former President Lula da Silva has been huge in Brazil and has continued with President Dilma. More than 30 million poor people have raised themselves out of poverty in the last 8 years because of social programs. But I have to mention and emphasize that is not enough. There are many millions of poor black Brazilians and others, but mostly black Brazilians who live in poverty. The favelas exist exclusively for the black population, and thus this legacy can't be the end. More than 30 million black Brazilians and Brazilians in general have gotten out of poverty, and thus we hope the black votes will be a mandate for the President of Brazil. Put a political emphasis on the black community, which suffers from a greater level of poverty.
En Brasil, que son las que más sufren la pobreza.
With racism and discrimination touching so many countries, how does it come to an end? Where do you begin?
Hay mucho que hacer. En Estados Unidos puede ser.
There is much to be done. The United States can be a motor for change. The European countries, which had benefited from centuries of slavery, have a historical responsibility to transform what is happening in our communities. If the states don't transform the structure of power, if they don't open this structure, if they don't facilitate political participation, if they don't intervene economically and socially, and if they don't stop deciding questions for black people, it will be very difficult to have change. We ask from the powerful countries and their governments to transform the power structure to allow the possibility of fighting against poverty and racial discrimination.
Para que sea posible luchar contra la pobreza y contra la discriminación racial.
Guillermo Ponce, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.